A millionaire's fake bride, a fated mistake that led them to healing. The camera drifts through a golden ballroom, light shimmering off crystal chandeliers as a soft violin glides through the air. Hundreds of guests rise to their feet, their applause swelling like a tide. At the far end of the aisle, Rachel Evans takes a single breath, the kind that tastes like fear wrapped in hope, before stepping forward in a silk gown that catches every ray of light. Her smile is gentle, practiced, but her fingers tremble inside the bouquet she holds. Across the distance, the man waiting for her, millionaire Alexander Ward, stands perfectly still, his tuxedo sharp, his expression unreadable. His eyes follow her, dark and controlled, as if measuring every step she takes. The closer she gets, the colder the air feels. She reaches him. The music drops to a hush. For a brief second, their eyes lock, her searching, his guarded, and something unspoken flickers between them, something that does not belong in a wedding at all. The pastor begins the vows. Cameras flash. The world watches a fairy tale. But Rachel feels it, a shift in the room, a shadow behind his perfect smile, a truth waiting just beyond the ceremony's glow. And as the ring slides onto her finger, a single question rises, louder than the applause surrounding them. What exactly did she marry into, and who is the man behind that polished promise? Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support truly means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. We love knowing where our audience is tuning in from. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. The wedding was a masterpiece of luxury and perfection. A five-star ballroom glittered with chandeliers. White roses framed the altar, and a string quartet played softly beneath the golden lights. Every camera flash captured what looked like a fairy tale moment. Rachel Evans, the elegant daughter of the late insurance magnate Charles Evans, walking down the aisle. In a silk gown that shimmered like moonlight. She smiled, but inside her chest, her heart was pounding like a trapped bird. This marriage was not born out of love, it was born out of desperation. Her father's company, Evans Assurance Group, once one of the most trusted names in the American insurance industry, was now drowning in debt and lawsuits. The only investor willing to save it was the very man waiting for her at the altar, Alexander Ward, the young and powerful millionaire who had built his own fortune through mergers, risk calculations, and flawless control. Everyone in the audience whispered about how perfect they looked together, beauty and power, youth and wealth. But if anyone had looked closer, they would have seen the tension in Alexander's jaw as he watched her approach. His smile was polite, professional even, the kind that belongs to a man who signs contracts, not love vows. For Alexander, this marriage was business, a transaction, and deep beneath that calm exterior, it was also revenge. Years ago, when he was just a boy, his father's company, Ward Mutual, had collapsed after a failed deal with Evans Assurance. His father lost everything, his reputation, his clients, and finally his will to live. Alexander grew up believing that Charles Evans was the man who destroyed his family's legacy. Now, standing in front of Rachel Evans, he believed fate had handed him the perfect opportunity to make the Evans name pay. The pastor spoke the sacred words, and the couple repeated them as if reading from a script neither of them had written. I do. 2 words that sealed a 12-month marriage contract, a hidden agreement both had signed only days before. Rachel was to play the perfect wife, and in return, Alexander would save her father's company from bankruptcy. As he slipped the diamond ring onto her finger, she forced a smile, whispering softly, so only he could hear. Thank you for keeping your promise. He looked into her eyes and answered with a tone cold enough to freeze the air between them. Oh, Rachel, I always keep my promises, especially the ones that hurt. The guests laughed, unaware of the edge in his voice. Cameras flashed. Champagne was poured. The new Mrs. Ward waved to the crowd, feeling the weight of the ring like a chain around her heart. From the outside, it was the wedding every woman dreamed of, a millionaire husband, a life of luxury and security guaranteed by his empire. But beneath the surface, it was a deal built on secrets, pride, and old wounds that had never healed. As the orchestra swelled and the couple shared their first dance, Alexander leaned closer, his whisper almost a warning. "Enjoy the spotlight, Mrs. Ward. Because when the lights go out, you will learn who I really am." Rachel's smile faltered. The music played on, masking the storm that was about to begin. And in that grand ballroom filled with laughter and champagne, neither of them knew that this fake marriage, born from lies and revenge, would soon lead them to the most real love of their lives. The honeymoon ended before it began. Within days of the wedding, Rachel realized that the mansion she now lived in felt less like a home and more like a boardroom. The Ward estate, with its marble staircases and panoramic view of the Pacific, was stunning, but cold, perfectly organized, and silent. Every clock ticked with precision, every flower arrangement changed at the exact same hour each morning. It was a world built on control, and Alexander Ward was its architect. He left early each day, his black car waiting by the gates at 6 o'clock sharp. By the time he returned, the moon had risen, and his tie was loosened just enough to suggest exhaustion, not vulnerability. They ate dinner together, surrounded by expensive silence. Rachel tried to start small talk about the business merger between Evans Assurance and Ward Holdings, but Alexander's answers were clipped, calculated, and distant. To everyone else, he was the perfect husband, polite, generous, charming at social events. But behind closed doors, he was a man of strategy, not affection. His revenge was subtle, precise, the way a financial analyst dismantles a company, piece by piece. Rachel did not know that he had already begun to shift the power within her father's company. Through silent acquisitions, hidden clauses, and stock transfers, Alexander Ward was quietly becoming the majority shareholder. Within a few months, Evans Assurance would no longer belong to her family. It would belong entirely to him. But what Alexander had not planned for was the way Rachel carried herself through the chaos. She did not crumble. She attended every board meeting, read every report, and spoke with calm authority that surprised even his senior executives. There was a quiet strength in her that reminded him of the father he had lost, proud, unyielding, unwilling to bow to defeat. One evening, he found her in the study surrounded by paperwork, her hair tied loosely, her sleeves rolled up. The lamp cast a soft glow on her face as she reviewed company documents. Without looking up, she said, "You are changing the insurance portfolio structure, are you not?" Alexander paused. "You notice everything," he said flatly. "I have to," she replied, finally meeting his eyes. "Because this company is not just numbers to me. It is my father's name, his legacy." Her voice did not tremble, but something inside Alexander did. For a moment, he saw not the daughter of his enemy, but a woman carrying the same burden he had, the weight of a father's shadow. Later that night, when she had gone to bed, Alexander stood alone by the window, staring at the city lights below. He thought of his father's ruined office, the bankruptcy papers scattered across the floor, and the humiliation that followed. His fists tightened. Revenge was the only thing that had kept him alive all those years. And yet, when he saw Rachel smile politely at him during the next business function, when she reached out to steady his mother's arm as the elderly woman nearly stumbled, Alexander felt an unfamiliar ache in his chest. Something was changing, something he did not want to name. Still, he reminded himself of the plan. Emotions were dangerous, and forgiveness was not part of the deal. This was a contract, not a marriage. That night, as he passed Rachel in the hallway, she gave him a small nod and whispered, "Good night, Alexander." He wanted to ignore her, but instead, the words escaped his lips before he could stop them. "Good night, Rachel." It was the first time he had said her name with softness instead of bitterness. He closed the door behind him, frustrated, unsettled. In his world, every risk had a price, and he was beginning to fear that the most costly investment he had ever made was not financial at all. It was the dangerous possibility of feeling something real. Weeks turned into months, and what began as a quiet standoff slowly turned into something more complicated. Rachel and Alexander lived like two strangers sharing the same address, polite, distant, and careful with every word. Yet beneath that silence, emotions began to shift in ways neither of them expected. It started with small things. When the heater in Rachel's office broke during a late-night meeting, Alexander appeared without a word, placing a wool blanket over her shoulders before leaving the room. When his mother's health declined, it was Rachel who arranged the medical care and sat beside the older woman each morning, gently reading to her from a worn book of poetry. The staff began to notice. The cold air that once filled the mansion softened. Fresh flowers appeared in the dining room. The kitchen started preparing Rachel's favorite tea without her having to ask. Something invisible was changing in the house, something Alexander could feel but could not control. One evening, after a long day of board meetings, Rachel returned to the estate to find the power out during a storm. Lightning flashed through the glass walls of the living room as she searched for candles. Suddenly, Alexander's voice echoed from the hallway. "Stay where you are. I will take care of it." He found the breaker, restarted the system, and the lights returned with a gentle hum. When he turned, Rachel was standing behind him, her eyes reflecting the storm outside. For a moment, neither spoke. The thunder rolled, and she whispered, "You always know how to fix things, do you not?" He almost smiled. "It is what I do best." But her gaze lingered longer than before. "Then tell me," she said softly, "how do you fix a heart that has been broken by lies?" Alexander froze. He had no answer. The silence between them grew heavy, filled with everything they both wanted to say but could not. In the days that followed, Rachel threw herself into work, determined to prove her worth at the company that now carried both their names. She handled negotiations with precision, earning the respect of investors who once doubted her. Alexander watched quietly from the sidelines, torn between admiration and guilt. Every success she achieved reminded him that his revenge was built on the wrong foundation. One night, after a fundraising gala, they drove home together in silence. The city lights blurred past the car windows like streaks of memory. Rachel looked out, her voice barely audible. "My father used to tell me that trust is the only true currency in life. I guess he was wrong." Alexander's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "He was not wrong," he said quietly. "He just invested it in the wrong people." Their eyes met for a brief second, and something cracked between them, not anger, but recognition. They were both prisoners of the same past, fighting ghosts that no longer existed. When they arrived home, Rachel turned to leave, but Alexander stopped her with a single sentence. "Tomorrow, I will visit your father's grave." She turned back, surprised. "Why?" "Because I think I owe him something," he said. "And maybe I owe you something, too." Rachel did not reply. She simply nodded, her expression unreadable. But when she walked away, her steps were slower, gentler, as if a part of her wanted to believe him. That night, as Alexander lay awake staring at the ceiling, he realized that revenge no longer tasted like victory. It tasted like guilt and the growing ache of a heart that, for the first time in years, wanted to love the person it was supposed to hate. The following months turned the quiet tension between Rachel and Alexander into something far sharper. Business and emotion collided like two storms meeting over the same sea. On paper, they were partners. In reality, they were opponents fighting for control over the same empire, and perhaps, over each other. Evans Assurance, now rebranded as Ward, Evans Holdings, was preparing to launch a massive expansion across several states. Investors from New York to San Francisco were watching closely. Rachel worked late into the night, determined to protect what remained of her father's legacy. Alexander, just as relentless, sought perfection in every line of every deal. Meetings became battlegrounds. When Rachel disagreed with a new pricing model Alexander proposed, she spoke firmly, her voice steady. "This policy may raise short-term profits," she said, "but it betrays the trust our clients have had for decades. Insurance is not just numbers, Alexander. It is about protecting lives." He leaned back in his chair, eyes narrow, tone smooth but edged with pride. "And protecting lives requires capital, Rachel. Without growth, there is nothing left to protect." Their words cut like glass. The room fell silent. A few board members exchanged uneasy glances, sensing the invisible current that charged every conversation between them. Outside the conference room, rumors began to circulate. Some said Mrs. Ward was challenging her husband's authority. Others whispered that the two of them were not business rivals, but star-crossed lovers locked in a private war. Rachel ignored the gossip, but she could not ignore the strange rhythm her days had taken. She fought him at work, yet she thought of him constantly. Every look, every word they exchanged carried both anger and something dangerously close to desire. At night, when the house grew quiet, she found herself thinking about the man behind the mask, the way he had cared for his mother, the rare moments of warmth he tried to hide. She hated herself for noticing. She hated him for making her heart betray her mind. One evening, after another long day of debate, Rachel walked into Alexander's office to deliver a report. He was standing by the window, sleeves rolled up, the city lights reflecting off his watch. Without looking up, he said, "You never stop fighting me, do you?" She crossed her arms. "Someone has to remind you that not everything in life is a transaction." He finally turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "You think I do not know that?" Their eyes locked, and the air between them shifted. The argument that followed was not about business anymore. It was about pride, pain, and everything they had refused to admit. "Why did you really marry me, Alexander?" she demanded. "Was it revenge? Power? Or was it just to see if you could break another Evans?" His jaw tightened. "You have no idea what your father did to mine." "I know he made mistakes," Rachel said, her voice trembling now. "But so did yours. And so are you." The words hit him harder than she knew. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, almost against his will, he whispered, "I wanted to hate you. It was easier that way." Rachel stared at him, stunned by the honesty in his voice. Before she could respond, he walked past her, stopping just close enough for her to hear him say, "Be careful, Rachel. The closer you get to me, the more you risk losing yourself." That night, Rachel stood on the balcony outside their bedroom, looking out at the skyline. The wind was cool, carrying the scent of the ocean. Her mind replayed every word, every glance, every silence that lingered too long. She realized she was no longer sure where the business war ended and the emotional one began. Meanwhile, Alexander poured himself a glass of whiskey downstairs. He told himself he was still in control, still the man with the plan. But when he closed his eyes, all he could see was the look on her face when she said, "You are making the same mistakes." For the first time in years, the taste of victory felt bitter. Because deep down, he knew she was right. The battle between them was no longer about money or revenge. It was about something far more dangerous, pride trying to survive the pull of love. And as the night stretched on, both of them began to understand that sooner or later, one of them would have to surrender. The days that followed the confrontation in Alexander's office felt heavier than ever. The tension between him and Rachel was no longer something that could be contained behind closed doors. It had seeped into every meeting, every conversation, and every quiet glance across the table. To the outside world, they remained the perfect couple, beautiful, powerful, and unstoppable. But beneath the polished smiles was a truth so fragile that a single whisper could shatter it. Rachel had begun to sense that something was deeply wrong with the company's latest financial moves. Late at night, she combed through reports and legal documents, tracing every number, every clause. What she found made her blood run cold. A new set of offshore accounts had been created under a subsidiary she had never heard of, one controlled entirely by Alexander Ward. Her hands trembled as she turned the pages. These transactions were not about saving Evans' assurance. They were about taking it apart from the inside. Every deal she thought had been made to protect her father's company had been designed to transfer power, silently, incompletely, to her husband. That night, she waited for Alexander to come home. When he finally entered the living room, the clock had just struck 10. He loosened his tie, exhausted, and found her standing by the fireplace, holding a stack of documents. "What are these?" she asked quietly. He looked at the papers, then at her. His expression did not change. "Business," he said. "My business." Her voice shook. "You said this merger was to protect my father's name. You said we would rebuild, together." Alexander sighed, running a hand through his hair. "You knew what this was, Rachel. It was a deal. Nothing more." Something inside her broke. "You do not believe that," she whispered. "You want to, but you do not." He turned away, but her words hit him with the precision of truth. For years, revenge had been his armor. It kept him from feeling, from forgiving, from remembering what loss had truly meant. But Rachel, with her quiet strength, her stubborn compassion, had begun to strip that armor away without even trying. Still, he could not admit it. Not yet. Not when the shadows of the past still whispered his father's name. "I am doing what I must," he said finally. "This is not about you." Rachel's eyes filled with tears. "No, Alexander, It has always been about me. About my father. About punishing a ghost that has been dead for years. She dropped the papers onto the floor, her voice trembling. You are destroying everything you touch, and you do not even see it. Without another word, she turned and walked out. The sound of the front door closing echoed through the vast, empty mansion. For the first time in his adult life, Alexander did not chase control. He chased silence. He poured himself a drink and sat in the dark, the firelight flickering across his face. His mother's photo sat on the nearby table, the same mother Rachel had cared for so gently. He stared at it for a long time, remembering her words from years ago. Do not let your father's pain become your own, Alex. One broken heart does not need another. He had ignored her. He had built an empire on that pain, and now it was consuming him. The next morning, Rachel did not show up for the board meeting. Her assistant said she had taken a leave of absence. Alexander tried to focus on the agenda, but every sentence blurred. Every sound reminded him of her voice, her defiance, her faith that people could still be good. That evening, he walked into her office. Her perfume still lingered faintly in the air, mixed with the scent of paper and coffee. On her desk lay a small silver frame, a photograph of her father shaking hands with his. Two men who had once trusted each other, now the cause of two lives destroyed by vengeance. Alexander closed his eyes and whispered, "What have I done?" In the quiet that followed, he finally began to understand what Rachel had meant. The ghosts he was trying to defeat were not in her bloodline. They were in his own heart. And as the sun set beyond the glass walls, he realized that the greatest secret he had been hiding was not in his business. It was the truth he could no longer deny. He was falling in love with the woman he had sworn to destroy. Days passed without a word between them. The Ward mansion, once filled with quiet tension, now echoed with emptiness. Rachel had moved into a hotel downtown, leaving only a short note on the kitchen counter that read, "I cannot stay in a house built on lies." Alexander read those words over and over, each time feeling the same hollow ache spreading through his chest. At the office, her absence was impossible to ignore. The board members whispered, employees avoided eye contact, and the press began to speculate about the couple's sudden separation. For the first time, Alexander's composure began to slip. The man who once ruled over every detail with precision could not focus, could not sleep, and could not escape the image of Rachel walking away. On the third night, he drove through the rain to the hotel where she was staying. The city lights shimmered through the storm, reflecting off the wet pavement like broken glass. When he reached her floor, he hesitated before knocking. When the door opened, Rachel stood there in a simple gray sweater, her eyes tired but calm. "Alexander," she said quietly, "you should not be here." "I had to see you," he replied, his voice rougher than he intended. "We need to talk." She crossed her arms. "About what? The next deal? The next betrayal?" He took a deep breath. "About the truth." Rachel turned away, but he stepped inside before she could stop him. He looked around the small suite. Papers on the desk, a half-packed suitcase, a cup of cold coffee. It felt strange to see her living in something so ordinary, so far from the world of power and luxury they had shared. "I know what you found," he said finally. "The offshore accounts, the acquisitions. I will not deny them." Her voice broke, but her words were steady. "Then there is nothing left to say." "Yes, there is," Alexander said, taking a step closer. "Because you do not know why." Rachel turned sharply, anger flaring in her eyes. "Why? Because you wanted revenge? Because you needed someone to blame for your father's death?" He closed his eyes for a moment. "Because I thought hating you would bring him back. Because I thought destroying Evan's assurance would fix what I lost." She stared at him in disbelief. "And did it? Did it fix anything?" He shook his head. "No. It broke everything else." Silence filled the room except for the sound of rain against the window. Rachel's anger slowly gave way to sorrow. She sat down on the edge of the bed, her voice barely above a whisper. "You could have told me, Alexander. You could have trusted me." He knelt down in front of her, his tone soft and stripped of pride. "I did not know how. All my life, trust has been something I used to gain power, not something I gave freely." Her eyes met his, and for the first time, she saw the man beneath the armor, not the millionaire, not the enemy, but the wounded son who had carried his father's ghost for far too long. "I wanted to hate you," she said, her voice trembling. "But I cannot, and that terrifies me." He reached for her hand, hesitant, uncertain. Then hate me if you must, he said. But do not leave. Please. Rachel pulled her hand away gently. You cannot ask me to stay in something that was never real. He swallowed hard. It is real to me now. The words hung in the air, raw and unpolished. Rachel looked away, unable to hold his gaze. I need time, she whispered. And you need to face the truth about your father. Until you do, there is no future for us. She stood and walked to the door, opening it quietly. The hallway light spilled across the floor, bright and cold. Alexander rose slowly, his eyes fixed on her face. Rachel, if I told you everything, if I showed you what really happened, would you listen? Her hand tightened on the door handle. If it is the truth, she said softly, then yes. He nodded once and stepped out into the rain. The storm outside mirrored the one inside him. Fierce, relentless, cleansing. For the first time, he knew what he had to do. He would uncover the truth, no matter how much it cost him. Because only by facing the past could he hope to earn the woman he had betrayed, and the love he never believed he deserved. The morning after the storm, Alexander sat alone in his office. The city outside was washed clean by the rain, but his world had never felt darker. Rachel's words echoed in his mind. Face the truth about your father. It was the one thing he had never dared to do. For years, he had buried himself in business, in power, in control, convincing himself that revenge would give him peace. But now, peace felt impossible. He opened the old leather briefcase that had belonged to his father and pulled out a bundle of documents, contracts, and letters that had been locked away for over a decade. His hands shook as he unfolded one of them, a letter addressed to Charles Evans. The words inside told a story completely different from the one he had grown up believing. His father had not been an innocent victim of Evans' assurance. The collapse of Ward Mutual had been caused by his father's own greed, a secret fund that failed, investments made without backing, lies told to investors. Charles Evans had actually offered help, but his father's pride refused it. The truth hit him like a tidal wave. Everything he had built, every deal, every scheme, every bitter word, had been founded on a lie. He sat there for hours, unable to move. The man he had idolized had destroyed himself, and Alexander had carried that destruction forward. The realization hollowed him out completely. By late afternoon, he knew what he had to do. He called a press conference for the next day, one that would expose everything, his father's mistakes, his own manipulations, and the unethical deals made under Ward Evans Holdings. It would ruin his reputation, maybe even his fortune. But for the first time in his life, he wanted honesty more than power. That evening, he went to find Rachel. She was still at the hotel, preparing to leave for a charity event. When she opened the door, she looked surprised to see him standing there, soaked again from the rain. Alexander, she said cautiously, what are you doing here? I found the truth, he said simply. And tomorrow, the world will know it too. She frowned, unsure whether to believe him. What are you talking about? He handed her the letter. She read it slowly, her expression shifting from confusion to shock, then to quiet grief. When she finished, she looked up, her voice unsteady. So it was never my father. No, Alexander said. It was mine. I destroyed your company, your peace, everything, because I could not let go of a lie. Tears filled her eyes. Why are you telling me this? Because you deserve the truth, he said. And because I cannot ask for forgiveness unless I am willing to lose everything first. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The sound of rain outside was the only thing filling the silence. Then Rachel whispered, do not do this for me. Do it for yourself. I am, he said quietly. For the first time, I am. The next morning, news cameras lined the steps of Ward Evans' headquarters. Reporters shouted questions as Alexander stepped up to the podium. Rachel watched from the crowd, her heart pounding. He spoke clearly, every word steady. He confessed everything, his father's deception, his revenge, his manipulation of the merger, and the truth that had been hidden for years. When he finished, the room was silent. In that silence, Rachel realized what redemption looked like. Not perfection, but courage. When Alexander stepped down from the podium, he caught her eyes in the crowd. He did not smile, but there was peace in his expression, a kind of acceptance she had never seen before. That night, as she looked out from her hotel balcony, she whispered to herself, sometimes it takes losing everything to find what is real. And somewhere in the city below, Alexander Ward, once a man defined by revenge, finally understood what it meant to let go. A week passed after the press conference, and the world around Alexander Ward changed overnight. The empire he had built began to tremble. Stocks fell, contracts were canceled, and business partners distanced themselves in silence. For years, he had been the man everyone feared, the man who never made mistakes. Now, he was the man the headlines called the millionaire who destroyed himself for the truth. But strangely, Alexander did not feel broken. For the first time, he could breathe. Every lie that had chained him to the past was gone. What hurt was not the loss of his fortune. It was the distance between him and Rachel, the woman who had taught him what honesty felt like. He tried to call her, but she did not answer. He sent letters, but she did not reply. He could not blame her. Forgiveness, he now knew, was not something one could demand. It had to be earned. One afternoon, while sorting through old files at his father's house, Alexander discovered a small wooden box inside a desk drawer. Inside the box was a bundle of letters tied with a faded blue ribbon. They were addressed to Charles Evans, but had never been sent. His hands trembled as he unfolded the first one. It was written in his father's handwriting, shaky and uneven. Charles, I was wrong. I let pride destroy what friendship had built. You tried to help me, and I turned you into my enemy. If my son ever finds these letters, tell him the truth before hate consumes him the way it consumed me. Alexander sat back in silence, the letter slipping from his hands. His father had already confessed. The man he had spent his life avenging had already sought forgiveness. It was as if the ghosts that haunted both families had left behind one final message. The past could only be healed through truth. That evening, Alexander drove to the cemetery, carrying one of the letters with him. The sky was painted in shades of gold and gray, and the air smelled of wet grass. He stood between two graves, his father's and Charles Evans's, and placed the letter between them. I think you both have said enough, he whispered. It is time someone else ends this. When he left the cemetery, something inside him had changed. The weight he had carried for years was finally gone. Meanwhile, Rachel sat alone in her late father's study, surrounded by books and memories. On the desk lay the newspaper with Alexander's confession printed on the front page. She had read it dozens of times, each time feeling something different: anger, sadness, and now quiet respect. She opened a drawer and found her father's journal. Between its pages was a letter she had never seen before. It was addressed to her. My dearest Rachel, if you ever face betrayal, do not let it harden you. Remember that forgiveness is not weakness, and truth is not defeat. Sometimes, forgiving someone is the only way to protect what is still good in the world. Tears filled her eyes. Her father's words were simple but powerful, and in that moment, she finally understood. She closed the journal and whispered to herself, forgiveness is the only thing that breaks the cycle. That night, Rachel wrote a letter of her own. Alexander, I do not know if we will ever find our way back, but I know this. You faced the truth, and that matters. I forgive you, not because I have forgotten, but because I want to live again. She folded the letter carefully, but instead of sending it, she placed it in a drawer. Some words, she realized, were not meant to be delivered. They were meant to set the heart free. Outside, the night sky stretched endlessly, calm and quiet. Somewhere across the city, Alexander stood on his balcony, feeling the same peace she did. Neither of them knew it yet, but forgiveness had already begun its quiet work, healing two hearts that had once been enemies, and preparing them for something far more powerful than revenge had ever been. 3 months later, the chaos had settled. Ward, Evans Holdings no longer dominated the headlines, and the scandal that once shocked the business world had begun to fade. Alexander had stepped down as CEO, selling most of his assets and dedicating what remained of his wealth to something new. The Evans Ward Foundation, a nonprofit organization designed to protect small businesses from collapse. The irony was not lost on him. He had once destroyed lives through power, and now he was trying to rebuild them through compassion. Rachel had returned to work as a consultant, quietly guiding the foundation's projects. It had taken time, weeks of silence, long nights of reflection, before she agreed to even speak with Alexander again. But when she finally did, it was not anger that filled her voice. It was calm understanding. Their first meeting after months apart took place in the new foundation's office. The air smelled faintly of fresh paint and coffee, and sunlight poured through tall windows. Rachel entered the room, holding a folder against her chest. Alexander was already there, standing near the window, wearing a simple dark suit instead of his usual tailored perfection. He turned as she approached. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly. "I am here for the foundation," she replied. "Not for you." He nodded. "That is more than I deserve." There was no bitterness in his tone, only humility. Rachel handed him the folder. "The board approved your proposal. The first grant will go out next week." "That is good news," he said softly. "Your father would have been proud." Rachel hesitated, then met his eyes. "And yours?" Alexander smiled faintly. "I think he finally would be at peace." For a moment, silence hung between them. Not heavy, not sharp, but peaceful. It was the silence of two people who had finally stopped fighting fate. After the meeting, as Rachel prepared to leave, Alexander spoke again. "Rachel," he said, his voice low and sincere. "You once told me that forgiveness was the only thing that could end a curse. I did not understand then, but I do now. Thank you for teaching me that." She turned, studying him carefully. "I did not teach you anything, Alexander. You learned it yourself." He took a step closer, cautious but hopeful. "Does that mean there is still a chance for us?" Rachel smiled gently, her eyes warm but guarded. "I do not know. But I do know that the man standing in front of me now is not the one I married. And that is a start." He exhaled, a small, almost disbelieving laugh escaping his lips. "Then that is enough for me." Weeks later, they stood side by side on the stage of the Foundation's first public event. Donors, entrepreneurs, and reporters filled the hall. Rachel addressed the audience first, her voice steady and heartfelt. "We built this foundation not from victory, but from loss," she said. "Because sometimes the greatest strength comes after we have been broken." When she stepped aside, Alexander took the microphone. "I once believed success was measured by wealth," he said. "Now I know that true success is measured by the people we choose to protect." Applause filled the room. Rachel glanced at him, and for the first time in a long time, she smiled, a real, unguarded smile that reached her eyes. After the event, they stood outside as the evening breeze drifted through the city. The skyline glowed softly in the distance, lights flickering like quiet promises. Alexander turned to her. "Rachel," he said gently, "I cannot change the past, but I can spend the rest of my life honoring what we have learned from it." She looked up at him, her voice barely above a whisper. "And what have we learned?" He smiled. "That forgiveness is not weakness. It is the insurance of the heart, to keep it from breaking again." Rachel's eyes softened, and she reached for his hand. "Then maybe it is time to stop rebuilding what we lost, and start building something new." He nodded, squeezing her hand gently. "Together?" "Together," she said. As the city lights shimmered around them, they walked forward, no longer enemies, no longer bound by revenge, but two souls finally free. Because in the end, love was never the battle they had to win. It was the peace they had to find.